Today I'm here with Clare Matysova, who is a Senior Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Partner at the University of Aberdeen. Clare has been working in EDI roles within higher education institutions for the past 15 years, including at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the University of East London, and the University for the Creative Arts. Clare is also a PhD researcher at the University of Leeds, focusing on gender equality and looking at the impact of the shared parental leave scheme from the perspective of couples' decision making. So welcome, Clare.
Thank you. Hi, Jeremy. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. So I wanted to talk to you because you've been doing some research on universities and other higher education institutions, looking at their approaches to paternity leave and pay. And you did a freedom of information request. I think this was last year. Can you tell us some more about that work and what you've been finding out?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it was last year. So as you said, like I'm a PhD researcher, and my research focuses on shared parental leave, actually. So parental leave more broadly and how parents decide. And obviously I've been thinking quite a lot about that, and in the context of working as well within EDI, within higher education, I really wanted to kind of think about look at what universities are doing specifically. So for my PhD research, I have quite a few participants were from higher education, so I could kind of see where their experiences were coming from. I wanted to look at where are we in terms of parental leave and paternity leave across the sector. And I knew that UCEA, the Universities and Colleges Employer Association, had done a benchmarking exercise, but that was quite a few years ago in 2016. So I wanted to have a look and see where we were now. So I put out a freedom of information request to all universities, and I got over 100 responses. And from those responses, so I could see quite a variety of approaches to enhancing paternity leave. So about 7% just stick with the statutory. They don't offer more than, they do facilitate statutory, but they don't offer any more. On the average is about 2 weeks that universities enhance. About 60% of universities enhance for 2 weeks, 2 weeks of paternity leave. And then there are some examples of universities, about 10% offer 4 weeks, and other examples of offering more than that, and some actually equalise leave. I was looking as well, like I looked at paternity, but I also looked at maternity and shared parental leave. So shared parental leave, most universities can either do the statutory or for, again, enhanced. So about 60% enhanced, which hasn't really changed since UCEA did their benchmarking in 2016, which is quite interesting. And then maternity leave, the average is about 18 weeks that universities enhance. So most universities enhance around 18 weeks, but there's a real mix of what universities are doing. So there's only a handful that still only have statutory, but some go beyond the 18 weeks. So there's kind of a real variety in terms of what universities are enhancing or doing. Yeah, some that are kind of somewhere between the statutory and the 18 weeks. But generally you've got 18 weeks maternity and 2 weeks paternity. That's what universities are offering. So that's what kind of stands out. And then you've got the universities that have got those more progressive policy offerings. So they stood out from the freedom of information, but also there've been universities that have been offering more progressive policies like since then. So obviously the Oxford University is the most recent one, isn't it, with the 10 weeks. University of the Arts London were the first to offer equalised leave, so 6 months to any to all parents, which was a couple of years ago. And London Met, I think it was in 2023, doubled their maternity leave to a whole year, which is amazing. And they also doubled their paternity leave to 8 weeks, but you still got quite a big difference then between the maternity and paternity. So what kind of stands out to me is that kind of variety of how universities are approaching this, and how does it link to how they're thinking about gender equality. You know, some are offering equalised, so they're thinking about gender as equitably, or some are really still differentiating between the mothers and the fathers. Yeah,
it's very interesting, isn't it? And it's, I mean, apart from anything else, I find it fascinating that the way we need to the way we find out about this is by doing like a freedom of information request, which is very laborious. And I mean, that's part. I was interested to see that you'd done this, because that, you know, that's a kind of a method that I've been thinking to do with other kind of public sector bodies. And so yeah, so I know just how laborious that is, and you have to, and then you have to wait to get the result and so on. So yes, it's a fascinating example, this, I think, of how opaque all of this stuff still is, actually, in terms of you know what I mean? There isn't like a single straightforward way. If you were a dad or a mum thinking, okay, I want to see what all the universities offer,
yeah,
where
that's
do
a
you
really
go?
good point. Yeah, so one of the questions I asked actually in the freedom of information was whether they shared their policy online or not. Like, you know, so whether it was externally accessible. So if you were going to apply for a job at a university, could you have a look and see like what are their family leave policies like? I mean, like, I'm actually going to be changing jobs quite soon, and I'm not planning to have another child, but it's still quite interesting just to see what their approach is to gender equality and to EDI. So obviously, because my head's thinking about family leave, but yeah, even if you're not expecting or planning to have, you know, it's still, you know, either way, it's still quite interesting to see. And it's interesting that only 50% of those that responded published their policies online. Yeah, so that they were externally available.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? So okay, so what you have discovered is, well, lots of things really. Like, so the variability is clearly there as an issue, and you've also found, I suppose, that there are universities out there that are thinking about this and introducing, you know, enhanced policies, some of which seek to kind of equalize the offer for mothers and fathers. You know, basically take a kind of view of, you know, if you are a parent, we're going to give you access to a decent amount of leave, but some are enhancing the maternity more than the paternity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's obviously like much more thought and progress has gone into the maternity leave than has the paternity, definitely. Yeah, and like I say, like it's about 18 weeks, and I guess that will have, you know, gradually increased over the years, and so we've got to that point where that's kind of the norm. Like there's still outliers and some that are only it's only a handful that are offering statutory, and some that might be offering less than 18 weeks, but generally that's roughly where we're at, and that's kind of like accepted norm, whereas it feels like we haven't thought about paternity leave to the same extent, or definitely not in the same way. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we, I mean, what do we know about the effect of different parenting leave offers in the higher education sector? Like, do we know the extent to which these offers are potentially having an impact on the gender pay gap, for example? Like, I've seen a paper where the Higher Education Policy Institute was talking about institutions with smaller pay gaps having kind of narrowed the gap between the maternity and paternity offers, but I think it was a quite small sample, so I don't know if it's you know, have you got a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that was kind of intriguing me. So most universities now, if you look at their website or, you know, look at their strategies, most universities or a lot of universities are talking about inclusion and equality. That's one of their key kind of core values. And obviously working in EDI, I'm kind of aware of that. And so that's why I was kind of thinking about that. And then all universities pretty much look at the gender pay gap and publish, you know, actions to address the gender pay gap. So that's why I've been kind of thinking, you know, how does that link to maternity and paternity offer? And having, you know, having worked in the sector and looked at various action plans, I can see when universities are thinking about gender equality, there will be some focus on parental leave, but much more it's about, you know, career progression, leadership programs, women in leadership, those kind of things. So it's a different kind of, that's kind of the focus. I know that there has been research, so I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, Epifano and Trago. You might have to cut that. That's the word. So previous research has been done that looked at the connection between HE income and what they were offering in terms of parental leave. And they didn't find that there was a connection between the income and the parental leave, but they did find a connection between the numbers of employees and the staff-student ratio. So it's kind of interesting thinking about what's going on. But also what stood out to me was that it was the research-intensive universities, rather, that were doing more. So what is it about those research-intensive universities? And is it a competition, you know, competitive thing, being competitive in the market, being able to attract staff to your university? That's what they were kind of suggesting that it might be. But again, it didn't seem to link to progressing gender equality. So there's kind of a different kind of driver. And when I did the freedom of information, that was I wanted to look at, you know, did it stand out that there was a connection between gender pay? But I couldn't see that. There were universities that had small gender pay gap and also didn't offer very good, you know, maternity or paternity leave. And then, Rose Stevenson, who works for the Higher Education Policy Institute, she was writing a paper and contacted me and asked me to have a look at the draft paper. And then I was looking through it, and that's when I kind of saw that connection, that it wasn't necessarily the overall kind of offering really good packages of policy and the pay gap. What it looked like was where there was a smaller gap between the maternity and paternity leave, there was a smaller gender pay gap. So I don't think we didn't think like, okay, there's definitely a correlation here, but maybe it's something around the culture, you know, and the expectations around how, you know, those employers are seeing parents and what parents want. So, but it still feels like quite a gap, you know, in terms of research and looking at what the impact of the policies is and how it's framed and connected, you know, with how we think about equality. Like I was saying before, that gender equity versus gender, like differentiating between maternity and paternity. So it feels like there is a link there, but we need to do more to understand what that's looking like. Yeah.
So I suppose I'm always quite interested to discover what it is that drives organizations to develop progressive offers, and to understand like what data they're gathering about the impact of those offers, and whether those offers are part of a kind of coherent strategy, and whether they're looking at data and tweaking their offer accordingly, and so on. But as an external person, you can't really get access to all of that knowledge because it's commercially sensitive.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good point, which is why I guess is why trying to look at websites and seeing what information you can gather. But I mean, having worked within the sector and worked within EDI, it has given me some insight into obviously how universities do it. I don't know if you know about Athena Swan. So Athena Swan is a charter mark that majority of universities are working towards, or have been working towards over periods of years. You can apply bronze, and then you kind of show how you're progressing to silver, etc. And that was another question I did ask in the freedom of information. I think it was about most of the universities had applied, but it was about 20 that didn't have the award.
Right.
So, and I've been on a panel on Athena Swan panels as a reviewer for about 10 years. So I've seen what's in their submissions. The charter's changed over the last few years. So as it was originally kind of set up, it was quite structured, and there were a number of sections that you had to respond to. So one of those sections was specifically on leave, paternity, maternity, shared parental leave. So institutions had to provide that information. Now they've transformed the charter, so there's more flexibility in what institutions focus on. So they don't have to provide that data. There are mandatory data sets, but that's not one of the mandatory data sets. The leave and the take-up of leave is not.
Okay.
And still continuing to be on the panels, I can see, there has been, I feel like there has been less focus on any kind of parental leave. Again, like I was saying before, there's a focusing on recruitment, promotions, all of those kind of processes, but maternity, paternity, family leave doesn't seem to come up quite so much. And when it does, in the previous iteration, it was definitely much more focused on maternity leave. Paternity leave would be looked at, but it was felt more, more surface level. And shared parental leave, it was used to frustrate me, because shared parental leave was like, oh, no one's taking it, but no real kind of like, very rarely was it like, why is no one taking it? It's important for gender equality. So yeah. It kind of stood out to me. There is in the Athena, with the new Athena Swan, there is a specific principles you have to sign up to, like a number of principles, like 10 principles, and one of them is specifically on the gendered impact of caring responsibilities. So it's there, and universities are expected to think about it, but because they're prioritising, they won't necessarily put that up as a priority. Yeah. And like I'm saying, like what does the gendered impact of caring responsibilities, what does that mean? Does that mean we've got that gender equity, or are we differentiating? So I don't think, like I say, I don't think we really, as a sector, have kind of delved into that enough and asked parents what they want, how do they kind of, hope to share care? Do they kind of think about it as the mother will take most leave and the father won't take, I don't think we've kind of explored that enough to know what parents want. So in my PhD research, like I said, a lot of the participants were HE parents from the HE sector. And there was quite a lot of frustration with the policies as they are now, and wishing that they would be offer more, but also there's the culture piece which really came through. So even if institutions were offering shared parental leave, because in theory dads can take leave through shared parental leave, right? But it was kind of like, well, the policy's there, but we don't really feel that we can access it, and a lot of parents experiencing prejudice, so mums experiencing prejudice around taking leave. So in that context, how a dad's going to feel as well,
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, it's quite depressing, actually, isn't it? This, because I feel like I feel like, you know, if you said to me like what would be like the most progressive employers, I probably would have said that I would have expected universities to be pretty good on this.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, they are on paper, aren't they? I
um,
mean, 18 weeks for maternity, that's good. And
yeah,
it's not so good. It's
that's
not good
good.
for
Yeah.
dads who've only got 2 weeks or partners that have only got 2 weeks. But yeah, it's a very competitive sector for academics. It's very competitive.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's maybe not quite as shiny, but as it might seem from the outside, yeah, which is why we've got these Athena Swan Charter and trying to
Yeah. And I guess also, to be fair, universities are big institutions, aren't they? And they employ lots of different kinds of people. So I suppose what if I think about it, I probably think, you know, universities would be progressive because they've got these you know, highly is like this very competitive pool of people that they're trying to attract, and that I'm thinking of the academics, I suppose, and that these are people that you want to hold on to, and you know, because they have a particular I don't know, set of skills, a particular reputation, and so on and so on. So in the same way that, you know, a lot of the really innovative employers in the private sector are often, you know, they're like the legal firms and the management consultancies, and do you know what I mean? These sort of expensive staff, if you like, that you can't afford to lose. But I guess a university as a whole is not just that.
No, and also the way that research is funded, it means
Is
that a lot of staff
works against it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of staff are academic staff, or are on fixed term contracts, from one fixed
Yeah.
term contract to the next, from one grant application to the next. So
Yes.
you know, especially early career research, I can't remember what the percentage is exactly, around 40-50% of early career research will be on fixed term contracts, not until they would get to the, you know, associate professor or even professor sometimes, that they're actually on a permanent contract. So that's a huge impact. And one of the other things I asked about in the freedom of information request was about eligibility and how long you needed to be employed to be eligible to, you know, the enhanced leave. You know, statutory has got those, you have to be employed for a certain period of time anyway, doesn't it? But then the enhanced, yeah, what does that look like? And I've been really conscious of it working in the previous institution where there was a really high percentage of staff, academic staff on fixed term contracts, and experiences of colleagues who, because they're moving from one contract to the next, just not being entitled to anything, you know, only getting maternity allowance straight, going from, you know, having a baby to living on £170 a week, you kind of, you know, and in thinking about that, you know, precarity crisis within higher education, what are universities doing to respond? So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to ask. And it is interesting because there's about 20 universities that have taken away that eligibility criteria. So they're offering leave, enhanced leave, as a day one right, which is amazing. So it is depressing in that there's a lot more to do, but there are examples of those, you know, universities that are really doing something interesting and doing something more progressive. So yeah, and obviously there's the financial situation more broadly in terms of HE that is quite, you know, concerning at the moment. So it is difficult, you know, if we're trying to work with the university to kind of look at how can we progress and enhance leave, but then obviously the question is going to be, well, what's the cost and how is that going to impact? Yeah. But I think it's kind of looking at those progressive universities that, you know, how have they managed that? Because, you know, for example, taking away the eligibility criteria, it's only going to be a very small handful of staff that are in that situation. The impact on those individuals is huge, but on the organisation, like you say, it's a big organisation, not going to be a big impact, really in the grand scheme of things. So I think it's really interesting to look at what those more progressive universities are doing and how have they kind of, linked that, like you were saying before, like to their broader strategy, to their gender equality strategies, that kind of thing, and looking at those different approaches. So what is it that's driven those quite different approaches to enhancing leave? Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a really good point about like how many people in any given year actually want to take this sort of leave. Do you have any sense of what percentage of a workforce is in the frame, if you like, for this leave at any given time? It's something that's I've always wondered, and I don't really know what the answer is to that.
And I don't know, I don't know, like in terms of having looked at that in detail. I only know from the couple of institutions that I've worked for, and just kind of thinking, oh, okay, I know because we collected the data for writing papers for this, that roughly it might have been about 50 a year, for example, and as a proportion of that employer, so it would probably only been about 2% of their staff. It noticeably goes really quite drastically, goes up and down. So it'd be an average, say, over a 5-year period. The two institutions that I looked at this data, it was an average of around about 2% of employees over a 5-year period. So it's not a huge number, is it? But
it's not. Although yes, you can imagine. Yeah, it's one of those things where I guess you could get a sort of unlucky year where suddenly, I don't know, your budgets get blown. I don't know.
Yeah. So I know that at previous university that was an issue. I'm sure it is a lot across the sector, but we had quite a few conversations about that, because it might be, you've got 10 schools within the university, and then this one school just happens to have a lot of people taking leave in 1 year, and then how do they manage that with their budget? So what they did is they set up a centralized pot, and I know that I think that's kind of practice, a growing practice across the sector, so that centralized pot kind of managed it, and then across the institution it's a little bit more even, manageable in terms of budget. So there's things like that. The other thing I forgot to mention around the fact that a lot of employees, academics, are on one fixed term contract to another based on grant funding. So the funders themselves also have different policies. So some funders will be more proactively kind of saying, we can extend the grant to cover that leave.
Okay.
Others won't, and then the university has to manage that budget. So there's things, I guess, that funders could be doing as well, thinking about.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Just thinking about fathers in particular, do you feel like there are particular issues with the culture of organizations and that sense of I mean, maybe this is true of mothers too, but the sense for fathers of actually being able to take leave. So even if there's a policy there, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a whole body of men who feel empowered to take the leave. Do you feel like that's an issue?
Yeah, definitely. Especially where the focus is on, or father's entitlement. They've got that 2 weeks paternity, but it's not very much. And if they wanted to access more through shared parental leave, like I said, like most of the universities have that shared parental leave, they enhance it to match the maternity. So there is entitlement there, but I think a lot of fathers wouldn't feel like they can ask and access. So my PhD research, that's what kind of a big part of my PhD research, and that a number of the participants, would say, or have said, I didn't even ask my employer because I didn't even ask them, like
Mm.
So yeah, they knew, maybe they knew it was there. I didn't feel I'm the one participant who was saying, you know, it didn't, I think that was during the COVID context, it didn't feel like I could, it felt too risky basically to be asking for, yeah, even though the policy was there. And then I think a lot of it as well would be down to, you know, the local you know, the team and the manager. So if how the manager's interacting with expectant parents, and if they're kind of saying, you know, there's this leave, you can take it, we can work together, how can we make this work? Or if that, you know, was pressure on, and I know there were pressure on the mothers, participants who are mothers from my research, you know, or you need to come back because of the research project's going to impact on the research project. So yeah, in that context, then definitely going to impact on their fathers as well.
Yeah.
Sense of entitlement to the leave. And the parents, they made a lot of suggestions themselves as to what employers could do. So, you know, making the policies accessible online would be one, like we've mentioned, but also kind of doing that, you know, case studies and demonstrating how families have managed it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like here's John. He took this amount of leave, and this is how it worked for him and his family and his colleagues and so on. Yes, it's
and when you read the policies actually as well, like some of the policies basically they read like legislation, they're so inaccessible.
Oh, I know.
And like a couple of them, in fact, a couple of the universities still talked about additional paternity leave. They didn't talk about shared parental leave, which is like, okay, that's a bit outdated. And a couple of them actually talked about fraud, like if they were to find a case of fraud in relation to shared parental, which I just think tells quite a lot about how it's thought about. So I know there are examples, again, not to be all negative, there are examples of universities that have done a lot to make their policies much more accessible and supportive and friendly, and then yes, have done those case studies, you know, this is how families have taken leave and that kind of thing. And I think it's quite interesting looking at progressive policies within the sector, but also outside the sector, like you mentioned, other, you know, employers in other sectors, but also what's happening in the EU with the, you know, the directive that actually has provision for non-transferable leave for both parents, which is about 2 months, isn't it? I think it's so. I think there's obviously kind of moving on, whereas I feel like we're stuck at this. That I think the really important bit is that non-transferable bit of it. So, you know, they might say, oh, but you've got shared parental leave. Yeah, we have, but it's not a good policy. One of the reasons it's not a good policy is because it's based on maternal transfer.
Absolutely.
And that means that the expectation, that reinforces the expectation that it's the mum that takes the leave. Which, you know, then it's kind of like, oh, well, mums don't want to share their leave. Well, actually, that's not necessarily the case. And it's just reinforcing that norm that mums take leave and then the dads don't feel they can take leave. So that non-transferable element is so important.